Hi, everybody. I'm Scott, and thanks for joining me again today for another episode of the podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin: The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2. Today, I've got a really interesting podcast and story for you, group of stories for you. Larry Becker's here joining me again today. Hey, Larry, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Great to see you. So, one of the things I want to dig into in this second season of the podcast is what everybody did after Evans. I've spoken about my own story, and I ditched the fur business and started trying to pursue my dream, which I guess now I'm doing. And it took me all this time to get there. But a lot of people stayed in the business, and Larry's one of them. So I want to hear his story, which I find fascinating. He and I have spoken about it offline. So we're going to try and recreate how wonderful our offline conversations were here. And so Larry, after he left the Far East and came back to the States, as we talked about in one of the earlier shows, ended up running, taking ownership of, I believe, and you'll tell us about it, and running one of the most well-known furriers in the country, if not the world. And it's a company that anybody who grew up in the 70s and 80s knows, because if you watched game shows at all, one of the prizes always given away were fur coats from Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills.
I'd
And
like to say the most desired prizes.
well, I mean, what an amazing branding job when you think about pre-computer days and having to come up with creative ways to advertise and market. Having somebody as popular as Bob Barker barking your brand out a couple of times a week was just an amazing and beautiful thing to watch from a marketing standpoint, and obviously great for the company. So, anyway, so let's dig into this. Larry, last we spoke, you had left Evans, moved back to Hong Kong, started your own company, and then called PBS, and then as the handover from the British to the Chinese took place, you came back to the States, and then started to find out what your next chapter was going to be. So tell us what happened after you came back here from PBS. In fact, you know what's a good place to start is I don't think I've ever asked you what PBS means and stands for. I could take a pretty good guess, but why don't we hear your story about it?
I'll bet your guess is right. PBS stands for Paul Becker's son. So the reason, I mean, that was something that I wanted to do as a tribute to my dad after he passed, because, gosh, for the longest time, I was introduced into the marketplace. Like I say, my father being at Evans opened the door for me to have a shot at a career at Evans. And, I looked at it. I mean, I spent 12 years working at Evans, and I rose through the ranks. And it used to bother me so that I would be introduced into whatever marketplace it was that we were in. And it would always be like, this is Paul Becker's son. This is Paul Becker's son,
That's
and
funny.
well,
Well,
and honestly,
I had the same thing. I was Harold
I
Sussman's
understand. I
grandson.
knew that you would
So,
understand this.
yeah, yeah.
And what really got me was that it used to piss me off. I would say to myself, I'm Larry Becker, and I mean, I'm taking this path. And it wasn't until I lost my dad that I realized what it meant to be Paul Becker's son. I never would have gotten where I was. I never would have started there had I not had been Paul Becker's son. So I was very happy at that point to lose my identity and be known as Paul Becker's son. So anyway, I leave. I didn't leave the business. I left. I still had ownership in PBS. I just moved back to the States with my family. And again, it put me in a situation where now I'm traveling. They called me an astronaut. I spent more time in the sky getting to work and coming home than most people do at work. So it really and truly did become, there was 4 years of that kind of travel back and forth. Also, combined with the fact that the industry itself was starting to fail. I
Okay,
mean,
but you stayed in it. So let me just direct you here a little bit. So you come back to the States after being there, and how much longer is PBS an ongoing concern for? What causes you to wind it down, and then sort of lead us into meeting the people who were in control of Dicker and Dicker at the time, and how that all came about, and to answer the question that you've just yourself raised is why you stayed in the industry then after that.
well, because I felt that I can answer immediately. I felt that I had an advantage I mean, I knew the industry. It's basically all I knew. I was trained and exposed to it. It was my first job and ended up being my last job, to work in that industry. But remember, I had a partner in Lawrence Chang. So
Yep.
Lawrence was still in Hong Kong. I still had ownership of PBS, but I moved back to the States. And again, I had to restructure the business now because I used to sell myself as having, look, you want to have my eyes on that.
That was the question I was just going to ask you is you sold yourself. I remember the story you told of everybody waiting to meet you at the elevator when the announcement was made in Sandy Parker. So you sold yourself as the guy who would have eyes and ears on the ground doing for them what you did against them. So now what's the reaction when you're not going to be there doing that?
Well, I had to go 180 degrees and change my marketing to say, we've got Lawrence in Hong Kong now. We already had, you know, not only did I have 6 years with him there, he worked for Evans previously. So he had the experience that certainly the time with me. Look, I learned a lot of Cantonese while I worked with him. He learned a lot of American bullshit when he worked with me. So Lawrence was really and truly, I was the one that was my time was spent with the principals, negotiating the prices and working out styles. Lawrence was responsible for the inspection part. Lawrence understood. He worked in a factory, prior to working at Evans. So he did understand. And again, the factory is a guy that's Chinese, speaking Chinese. He spoke Chinese. It was the best way of communication. So Lawrence was there again. Our ultimate goal.
Let me just interrupt you a second. When are we in this? What year and um, how
I
close
moved.
to and how close and how far are you bumping up against the British handover? And then the third part of that is how did the manner of doing business change after that?
Well, this was I moved my family and myself back to the States the latter part of '96. We moved to Connecticut. Now, again, what I was doing and stayed there through '99.
Okay.
All right. The what I did was, like I say, I remarketed the company, and I said, now
Yeah,
I'm
you're better off
here.
with me in the States now.
Absolutely. And you know what? Business improved because I was there. I was in New York 3 days a week, or I went to Canada once a month. You know what I mean? So
Uh-huh.
I was in their face instead of waiting for them to come to me. I was in their face. Although we didn't have Zoom and we didn't have, all of the high tech, I was on the phone with Hong Kong every single night, every night. And not with Lawrence, I mean, Lawrence, yes, we communicated, but it was, my business, I created the business. When there was nothing going on, I never sat in my office. I always went out and knocked on doors. That's how you found, new suppliers. So when there was no business, I didn't get paid. So I had to create business.
Right.
So when living in Hong Kong, I would run to the factories and say, look, what do you have an excess of? What can you offer me? I need mink coats. Here's the $1,000 mink coat. I need you to give me 100 coats at 900, and then they'll be sold. And I would, be able to call somebody from Hong Kong and say, look, I've got 100, 25 coats or 20, and, I'd split it up and I'd be able to get them sold. Now I'm with them and I'm seeing what they have and what they don't have and what they could use based upon, look, I was back in the travel game. I was in Hong Kong, I would say every 6 weeks, I'd spend 2 weeks in Hong
So
Kong.
you're back to the exact same grind that you were trying
Wh-
to avoid when
which is one
you
of
left
which is
Evans at
one
the
of
time.
which is one of the reasons that it ended for me in 99.
Right.
I found
Okay.
that combined with the fact that,
So
again,
is it something like that more than business? And
it
the
was a
difficulty of
combination.
doing business? Okay, so what about the other question I asked? Is there any change in the mode of doing business once the Chinese are in charge
A-
or
Absolutely not. In
okay.
fact, if anything, it became a little bit easier because when I first moved to Hong Kong with Evans, 1989, all the business was done in Hong Kong. All the manufacturing, it was all Hong Kong. And then it slowly moved in the 2 years that I was contracted by Evans, it slowly moved. I say slowly. It was quick. Within
Yeah,
two
2 years is
years,
quick, really, if you think
yeah,
about it.
within 2 years, everything was China. So it did become a different kind of business, and then it became a smuggling business because you needed, in the beginning, you were able to take your goods from China, bring them to Hong Kong. I can inspect them in Hong Kong, and then ship from Hong Kong. Then it changed. The Chinese government.
And let me jump in a second. And I remember at the time being, on the retail end, it meant a lot more if the thing said made in Hong Kong versus made in China.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, it was just like made in Japan. The connotation of that in the 60s and 70s was, this stuff is garbage. Today, made in Japan, and then too, today it's recognized as being high quality because everything's made in Asia.
So well, you answered my question about China. So the business under China isn't any more difficult. So now lead me to what happens in '99 for you to sit there and decide. I imagine in concert with your ex-wife that that's I can't do this anymore, and what our next move is going to be, and then how this all leads to Dicker and Dicker, and how you meet those people and go from there.
Okay, so it's interesting. I'm on a trip. It was it was literally my kids were like 15 and 13 at this point. And again, now I'm back to traveling. It was a lot easier on them than it was when they were, 5 and 3. But I'm back
Right,
to
but
traveling.
at 15 and 13, you got to like kind of start thinking about their future, so you want to stay in the States at this point, right?
I was absolutely staying in the States. I was living in the States. Like I say, I was traveling way too much. And I guess I compensated that time away, my guilt compensated by gifting them, when I came home. And it was always, I wanted them to be so excited when I came home. You know what I mean? And it really depressed me because I knew that as soon as I got home, I started thinking about having to leave again. You know what I
Okay,
mean?
so that is a typical syndrome, obviously. Even Marnie Miller tells a story that about how AL always brought her something home from one of his trips, which is basically means that you as the parent were gone too often.
Exactly, exactly. We were When I was home in Connecticut. Like I say, I would go into New York 3 times a week, and I could go at my leisure. I would drive into New York, and when I was home, I helped to give the kids breakfast. I helped to take them to school. You know, it was like that was the time. And I'm sitting there at breakfast with my kids, and Justin, I believe, my youngest son, he said to me, because I was getting ready to go to Hong Kong again. And like I say, for that 4 weeks that I was at home, I was like Santa Claus. And he goes, Dad, you know, I just appreciate everything that you do for us, but something's missing. And I'm reaching into my pocket to get money to, well, what is it? I mean, we could take care of
It's
that.
not about
And
money, right?
and he goes, You're never home anymore. And it was like it hit me like, a stake through the heart. And again, I'm a great believer in timing and fate. I literally am leaving on a flight to go to Hong Kong, maybe 2 days later, and all I could think about was, I gotta change this up again. It's not working. And like I say, I was depressed because I was again always traveling. And
What's the state of
I
the
get
business at this point in '99? Is it okay still? And
I was making a living. I mean,
okay, okay,
and
but
it was
is it harder? Is it less of a living? Is it more hustling? Are you
it was
seeing
more
anything
hustling.
industry wide or
Here, the answer is when I started the business, I had Evans and 6 customers. At the end, it was 27 customers. So servicing 27 customers, because again, part of that job was making sure that everybody had a little creativity for their collection. You know what I mean? If everybody's fighting for the same style, nobody's going to make money. You know what I mean? They're all
right?
going to
Yeah, if it all
fight.
looks like the same shit in every store, it's nothing unique about it. So
Exactly. And again, at the end, at Evans, I mean, we talked about it before. We could buy a piece for $1,000, but we opted to not opted. Well, yeah, I guess we opted to buy
well,
it for
out
three
of necessity, we had no
out of
choice.
necessity, right?
Right.
To buy it at 1,000, you needed your money there. To buy it at 3,000 or 2,500, somebody was loaning you that money. They were loaning you the merchandise basically at that
Right,
point,
right, right. At a very
because
high interest rate.
well, exactly. So for me, so I get off the plane in Hong Kong, and I would fly on the red eye so that I would land at like 6 o'clock in the morning in Hong Kong, and to avoid jet lag. I would go to the hotel, I would take a shower, I would have some breakfast, and I'd go right to market.
Yeah,
And
sounds
then
like torture. Go ahead.
it wasn't
Yeah.
because it's like you're wired. The flight when I would do that flight, it was like 14 to 16 hours, depending on
Ugh,
the time of year. But it was nonstop. You know what I mean? So you'd get on the plane, you'd watch a few movies, you'd have a few drinks. I'd eat good because they always upgraded me. And anyway, this morning, I get off the plane, my normal routine, and I realized it was a public holiday in Hong Kong. So the places were closed.
yeah.
So I get to the Shangri-La Hotel, and I certainly didn't want to start my trip with a day off. Well, Frankie Wong, whose partner, he owned Rising Sun Fur Company, which was a manufacturer. Frankie had a retail store that was literally across the street from the Shangri-La Hotel where I stayed. And I said, all right, let me go take a walk, at least see Frankie. I called Lawrence. He was busy with his
Yeah.
wife's
Well, it's
family
a
and
holiday, right, right.
exactly. And P.S. I go into his place and he's like, and Frankie and I were he was the most he was like a gangster, a Western style. And P.S. I go in there and he's on the phone and he goes, Felix, I gotta hang up. Larry Becker just walked in. And Felix was his partner. He owned Samper Furs in California. But he was his partner because he was also a premier skin buyer of shit. And he would buy the shit. Frankie would damage it out, and made a product that looked a lot better than the skins. They had a good system going, and that's what made Frankie an important factor for us as Evans, because it was commercial mink, or it was commercial prices, but it was Danish mink. Not the best manufacturing,
No,
but the
or the best quality mink. So
right. The quality of the mink was really pretty good after he damaged, cut away all the damages. But the labor was, you know, not the best. But it was good value. You had a mink coat that you can offer for 19.99 and make a full markup. So anyway, I went in there just to hang out. And at this point, to chat with him, get a little bit of market update, and then hope that he bought me lunch. So I walk in, and Felix said to him, he goes, "Oh, Larry Becker's there? Let me talk to him." So, I mean, I knew Felix, I was going to say for 100 years. He was 100 years old,
yeah,
but I only knew him for about maybe 20 years. And I get on the phone, and he goes, "Larry," he says, thinking I want to retire or I want to step away. He was married to a woman like 25 years his junior, and she wanted to travel. She was Polish. I want to travel the world. And Wanda was her name. And he goes, "You know everybody in the fur business." He says, "Could you find me somebody that would be capable to manage my store? And that way I could be traveling and, Frankie could be in charge of the inventory, this and that." And it certainly didn't dawn on me then. I said to him, "Felix, I will, give it some thought and I'll get back to you." And Frankie and I, we had lunch, we had drinks. My day was really screwed because I think I went to sleep at
yeah.
7:30, and I had jet lag for the first week I was there. But that night, I'm sitting in my hotel room and I'm just thinking and thinking. And my thought process went to, who can I offer, to go to California? We had been in California. We knew that that was the golden spot to be in the fur industry. And I'm saying, who do I know that would be able to go there, and be a success? And I think to myself, holy shit, maybe it's me. So I call him. And I said to him, "Felix, are you really serious about retiring, taking it easy and retiring?" He says, "Yeah." I says, he goes, "You have somebody for me?" I said, "I may." I said, "Would you be interested in selling your business?" And he thought about it for a second and he goes, "Who would buy my business?" And I said, "Me." And I told him, I says, I'm ready to head back to the States now full time. And, uh, I want to have a business in the States. And it was, I mean, the first thing that I thought about was that, yeah, the fur business is starting its decline. And it seems that it's a rapid one. And I'm thinking, that's what I know.
I was
What
gonna
can I,
say, are you wrestling with that at all? Like for me, I left, and once I left, I was like, all right, well, I'll go figure out what to do, but I couldn't run away from this fast enough.
well, again, I had to run away, but I had to run with it
Right, right,
because
run towards it too.
I still felt there was a benefit for me in the fur business, and that was that I could buy that garment for $1,000.
Let me ask you a question. Had Felix owned it all that time? Because I remember,
No,
well, okay, yeah, because I remember I knew the owner of Somper Furs after I replaced Larry Friedman and would go
yeah,
to the meetings in Beverly Hills and everything.
he was one of the biggest personalities in Beverly
Yeah,
Hills.
yeah, I remember him.
I'm trying to think of his first, Ed Samper.
Ed Somper, right.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, even when I was at Robinson's, he was certainly a big factor. I mean, he had all the movie stars, and he had
Right,
it
right,
was a it was his personality that fueled the business. No doubt. It wasn't like a Robinsons. You know what I mean? Where the people come in and are buying off the racks. He was more of an Evans style, where he sat with the customer for 40 minutes, maybe showed them two coats. He sold them what he wanted to sell.
right.
And he was a master salesman. And he eventually he died from a brain tumor or something. He wasn't that old, and his wife, I think her name was Penny, she took over the business. And Felix was a manufacturer in Beverly Hills.
Okay,
So he was supplying them, and they were friendly, and one thing leads to another. He ended up taking over buying the business from
okay,
her. So I think at that point, he probably owned it maybe 10 years, maybe a little bit more. But on the phone the next day, he called me back and said he spoke to Wanda, and if I would be interested for real, that I should make a trip there, and because he was talking to me about, I wanted to talk about terms, and he says, well, the inventory is really the key. I think for key money, he wanted like 150,000, maybe $200,000 for key money for the name, and taking over the lease. And anyway, I was still going to be in Hong Kong for about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and I did make arrangements not to go home. I went from Hong Kong to Los Angeles to go and see. I had never walked into the store, when I lived in LA. I knew of it. They were our competitors, and I knew them from the meetings and stuff that we would
sure,
attend.
sure, right. Same here, right.
And I also knew that people would say, Felix, when you shake his hand, just make sure that you have all your fingers afterwards. He was one of those guys. And P.S., I did make that trip. I spoke to my wife. And I mean, she was very happy to be moving to Los Angeles. She would have preferred Chicago, but we just didn't have the clothes for it. So
Yeah,
uh, we she agreed, and I said, "All right, I'm gonna be home a few days later because I'm gonna be stopping in L.A." And I get to L.A. and I mean, I discussed this with nobody. I didn't I didn't discuss it with Lawrence, who was my partner, because I wasn't ready to make that announcement. This was not, I didn't think of it. It was Felix that brought it up. You know what I mean? I just
yep,
looked
very
at
interesting. Yeah,
the situation and my timing and how uncomfortable or unhappy I was. And this may have been the golden opportunity for me. That's how I looked at it. I get off the plane in LA. I go over to Sampa Furs. So this was 1998, I guess. 1998 or 1990. No, it was 1998. And I go right to Sampa Furs from the airport. And I'm looking, it looked like I was in 1960. The showroom was like, I swear to God, it was Evans showroom, maybe the
Uh,
70s.
for the same reason, it was from their glory day, and they could not get away from these. They were all the same. These guys in any of those glamour fashion people from the '60s. You hear that story over and over and over.
Well, I look at that and right away I say, all right, I'm going to have to put at least 100,000 into decor.
Well, that's
Okay.
a lot of bread. Okay.
Oh, well, it was Beverly Hills.
Yeah, but
Like I
still, I
say,
mean, it's got to be nice. Well, so
oh,
it's
it was
kind
a
of
big.
so. Let me ask you a question. When you walk in there and see that, I mean, I felt this way about Evans too. When you would walk on the third floor, it's kind of shocking that they're doing all this business in this environment.
Yeah. Well, I remember when you talk about that on the third floor. I remember when we were able to put like the contemporary furs in that area that was closest to the buying office, in the back. Before that, everything was like in the vault, and you had to bring it out, and that was their awakening to younger customers, and well, I guess it was also less expensive prices. You know what I mean? But these people, again, Felix, I guess at that time was about close to 80 years old. So that's the vision that he projected. I think he was very comfortable in that. And
Sure.
sadly, a lot of the customers that he had were from that era as well. You know what I mean? That's what he
Right,
attracted.
which means they're not long for this world at that point.
Exactly. When furs were, a generational business. When you had the grandmother, you were getting the mother, and then you were
Right.
getting the daughter. And it wasn't happening there because the daughter was 80 years old. You know what I mean? So anyway, I go, and that my first vision was, okay, this is not ideal. I loved the location. It was a perfect location on Canyon. And I say, okay, it's going to need a lot of decor update. And now I look at the inventory, which was the most important thing to me. Now, mind you, they were partners with Frankie. So their inventory was a rising sun inventory that was the shit that the inspectors that people ordered could not pass. And I'm looking at it, and he's showing me. There's one style, you'll remember it, 441. It was the man's full length coat, and a man's full length coat. And he's showing me a price. Like he says, okay, here's I'm just asking you the cost. And it was a retail price. I'm buying the same thing from Frankie with the best skins, and it was a third of the price. And I'm going through, and he told me when I arrived, he says his inventory is worth about $1 million. And I said, okay, let's go through. I
And
could
this is why
only,
he said to you it's all about the inventory.
well, yeah. Well, the bottom line is I'm going through an inventory that I am equating to about 200,000. And there wasn't, there wasn't the inventory that he said was there. And I made a fucking trip from Hong Kong to Los Angeles, and after being gone a month instead of going home.
Right.
And
This
I
is
got
no
a look.
schlep. This is no little schlep down the 405 from the valley.
Exactly, exactly. So I said to him, I says, Felix, something is not right. I says, you said that you got $1 million worth of. He goes, well, I have stuff out because he had guys on the road selling and this and that. I said, but you told me to come to LA, that you had the stuff here. I says, I'm going home tomorrow, and you get your stuff rounded up. I'll come back. And he called me. It was before my next trip because I stopped there before going to Hong Kong this time. And I get off the
How much
plane,
late? How much later?
probably a
A couple
month or
weeks.
so,
Okay. Okay.
a month, maybe, 5, 6 weeks.
Right. Right. Like your normal interval. Right. Right.
I get on the plane. I get off the plane. I go right to Samper, and I walk in there, and it was the same shit. And I'm like, Felix,
Oh,
what's going on here? And he says, well, they were supposed to ship the stuff in. And while I was there, I says, he told me that he had like 7 years
oh God.
left. He told me he had 7 years left on his lease. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm going to invest all this money, because I was still interested. I was hoping, again, if it was a deal based on inventory, I'm certainly not going to pay him $1 million for a $200,000
Of course.
inventory.
Right.
So I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to be able to make a deal at around $200,000. I said, let me go talk to Dembo. That was the real estate broker
Okay.
that held the lease. Let me go talk to Dembo and see if I can get it extended because I wanted to have at least a 15-year lease at that point, figuring I had to put so much money into the store. They show me the lease. He had like 12 months left on it.
Where did the 7 years come from?
Scott, I tell you something. I mean, I really and truly got pissed off. I really did. And I'm like, Felix, what are you doing here? I says, you told me 7 years, it's 12 months. You told me you got $1 million inventory and it's $200,000. I see it as $200,000. I said, the only thing I could do is offer you what was $400,000 or something in that neighborhood for the inventory and the key money. Simple as that. And they're going to think about it. I went on my merry way to Hong Kong. Oh, it was Hong Kong. I was going to Hong Kong that time because we were preparing for the Hong Kong Fur Fair. Lawrence and I were preparing for that. So, now I had to get all of my collections in order. I had to negotiate all of the prices. I was going to be there a while. And again, when I left, I had a couple of conversations with Felix, before going back to, before the fair. And I had several with Frankie. And Frankie just said to me, just watch out. You watch out. Because I was telling him what went on. And I said, Frankie, don't worry, I'm not buying that business, at his terms. And I
Right, but
and I'm telling
let me ask you. So what? But why after the the two clusterfucks, I should say, of the trips as well as the clusterfuck of the shape of the business, are you even having the discussion to go forward at this point still?
because I love the bones of the operation. I
Okay.
wanted I wanted a business that said of Beverly Hills, that I could say Samper Furs Beverly Hills is doing this caravan sale
Yep.
in
Yep.
butt fucked Idaho. You know what I mean? It
Yep.
had that lux because it was Beverly Hills, and it was a beautiful location, and I could have filled it with the right furs. I didn't have to use Frankie Wong's furs when I purchased it. And again, I was satisfied to purchase it for the value of the furs that I saw and his key money. If you and he basically agreed that he was willing to do that. We never did anything as much as shaking hands on it because I didn't have the opportunity. He still had to think about it. The next time I see Felix, he is sitting at breakfast at the Shangri-La Hotel, waiting to go to the fur fair, and he's dining with Lenny Tagg. Yeah, Lenny Tagg. And I'm like, oh, what? This is not good. I put the fucking idea in his head to sell his business, not hire somebody to run it. And now he's dealing with Lenny Tax. Something just is fishy.
Okay. And
And I'm
this also is about the time, the beginning of the time, because now we're going 98 into 99, that Lenny Tack and BC are starting to swim and circle around the
they were
Evans
taking the
carcass.
they were taking the retail business by storm as vultures. They would just, you're right, it was the carcass. They're waiting and then they scoop in. I mean, me, I offered him less than half of what he asked me for, but it was fair.
No,
I
but
mean,
right, but so, but what I'm saying is knowing what Lenny Tack is about and then seeing him there in that position with this guy, I mean, that's the first thing that goes through your head, right? Is he's
I
there
had
to
no,
take
I
this
had no,
deal away from,
I honestly had no qualms with Lenny Tax.
okay?
It was Felix, and I'm listening now to all the things that people told me. Shake hands, count your
Yep, yep,
fingers.
yep.
His own partner saying, just be careful, because he didn't fill in the because. but be careful was enough for me.
Right, right.
And at that moment, I sort of decided that I can't count on this. But I was ready to make my move. I mean, I was truly ready to make my move. And at the Hong Kong Fur Fair, and again, there was no deal made between Tax and him at that point, even after the fair. But I didn't count on it anymore. That Samper was going to be the one because why the fuck was he talking to him? It just didn't make sense.
But at least you've
Well,
got a direction idea in your mind for yourself at this point,
yes. Well,
whether it's
what,
Somper or something else.
right. So I had a couple of things that I had to accomplish first. I wanted to sell my half of the business. And again, how we talked about me going back to New York and restructuring so that look how lucky you are. I'm here now. And I did the same thing I did in Hong Kong, only it was more effective because I was now with the buyer every day. So it was easier for me to find a deal, to get somebody to make something. If somebody said, look, I could use this, as long as they said that, and there were several guys that always had money and were always looking for the advantage. And if there wasn't work, everybody's advantage was to take a little bit of a piece and put it on the table.
Okay.
What
So
happened
yeah,
was I
so
finished.
so so what happened with Somper? Let's wind we'll
Okay,
wind
so
down Somper and start to talk to Dicker.
so I finished business in Hong Kong. I go home, and now I decided that all it needed to be was really of Beverly Hills. So it could have been Becker and Becker of Beverly Hills, or it could have been, whatever furs Beverly Hills, could have been Beverly Hills furs and take it on the road. Because, like I say, I had that team ready to go. I didn't have brick and mortar. I didn't even, with Samper, I would have had brick and mortar. But then I realized, do I really need it? Because I could take this on the road and test the waters. So I end up, um, I end up going back home, and I discussed with my wife, and yeah, she always, every move we made was to better ourselves. So, I mean, yeah, you get comfortable, you have friends and this and that, but she always knew and accepted and supported a move. So I found Howard. I was looking for somebody that was capable to take over my side of the business, which was the sales, sales and servicing and styling. And I wanted Billy Mavrogian. I thought that he was the best guy, and he was the first guy I called. And he was with Alan Seufer. So Alan Seufer, and I really respected Alan Seufer.
And remember, Jimmy Leitz told a story about there was some
Evans,
potential deal that was scuttled that Alan Seufer was going to take over Evans
yeah.
and run
Well,
it with
yeah.
Evans still owning it.
Well, yeah. Right. He would have been like the president and the
Right.
CEO. Um, anyway, okay. So I get a call from somebody that says, "Do you know Howard Hinden?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "He was just fired from Oscar de la Renta. He's without a job." And because they were thinking maybe I could use him. And again, I'm thinking Howard Hinden. The only thing that I thought at the time was at the time I was 40 years old and he was probably closer to 60, maybe 60 already. And the job was grueling. If you're basing yourself in New York and having to travel all
It
that
kill. It would
distance,
even. I'm surprised even at 40, it didn't kill you. You know.
um, how can I put this? It was hard, which is why I considered, is Howard capable of doing it? I knew that he was the right guy for the job. He knew the fur industry inside and out, from the fashion perspective, from manufacturing. He could probably take the business to the next level, even. So I sat down with him, and I really didn't know him. I knew of him. And I knew in the old days when we would go into Oscar de la Renta, sometimes get thrown out. He was in the showroom showing that collection. And I asked him if he would be interested. And he said, yeah, he would. And I explained to him, I says, basically, I'm selling you a piece of paper. What it is a mailing list. You know, these are customers. I said, but what I will do is I will go to every one of those customers with you, and I will get them to sign an agreement that they're going to use you for the first year. You know, that they're going to give you the first year, the opportunity in the first year to be their agent. And it's
Okay.
up to you. You know, it's up to you for the rest of it. And I knew that he was perfectly capable of maintaining it. And they agreed. So now I got to talk to my partner in Hong Kong, and I got to tell him what's going on. And oh, he took a partner, which was fine. He took a partner in Hong Kong. It was one of the manufacturers that we did business with that ended up going to work for Jindo. Jindo closed their Hong Kong office, and Eddie Wan came to PBS. And he was on that side. Now I make a trip with Howard to Hong Kong and introduce Lawrence and Eddie to Howard and introduce, explain that I am leaving the company. You know, that I'm going on to my next mission, and Howard is going to take over my side of the business. And Lawrence, in front of Howard, says, "Can I talk to you for a second?" And I said, "Absolutely." I said, "Go ahead."
Never a
He
good
said,
sign.
Wait." So he goes, "Yeah, I'd like to talk to you, just Eddie, you and I." I said, "Anything you have to say to me right now, you could say in front of Howard." And he turned around. He says, "We don't want Howard." And I said, "Excuse."
Oh.
I said, "Excuse me." He says, "We don't think we need Howard. We're going to do it on our own." I says, "No, you can't." I said, there was when I turned the business over to Lawrence in Hong Kong by himself, and we were now 50-50 partners. I said to him, "I am leaving this spot. I'm going to the States." I says, "You got to walk under that sign every day that says PBS and Associates Hong Kong Limited. You got to walk under that every day, and your job is to make sure that PBS is proud. Whatever you do, you got to make PBS proud." And he agreed. And I said, "You're not making PBS proud. That's not going to work." And I says, "You're going to end up putting PBS out of business, because if there is no American wing to this business, it ain't going to last. They're going to end up going to, I mean, there were a couple of agents at that point. I thought that they were thieves. Marco, they were all skin dealers. So their way was to make money at every angle. Either they sold you the skins and crafted CMT for you, or they sold the skins to the
This is
manufacturer.
shocking. Okay. It's
Well,
unbelievable, the chaos. I mean, that's amazing. This industry was amazing sometimes.
yeah. So I'll tell you, I already had my plan. I washed my hands with an agency business now, and I
Right, but
was
as
going
you
to be.
said, you're still trying to get your money out of it. So
Well, I was trying to get whatever I could out of it. And like I say, all it was a list of, it was a mailing list. And we walked out of, I got up and I said, "Hey, Lawrence, if that's the way you feel," I looked at Howard, I says, "I apologize." I said, "This is a wasted trip and I'm sorry. Let's go home." And I said, "First, we'll go back to the hotel and get drunk, and then we'll go home." And we end up literally getting into the elevator, and the elevator door closes, and
Walt.
Oh no, I saw him running, both the two of them, Lawrence and Eddie, running to the elevator. The office was on the eighth floor. By the time we got downstairs on the elevator,
They were running down the
Lawrence,
stairs.
yeah, and he stopped me and he says, "I made a mistake. I made a mistake. We'll take Lauren. We'll take Howard." Now we were readying. Now this was already the next season. By the time I had all of this in place, so we were readying for the Hong Kong Fur Fair. All right, we had 27 customers. Well, not all 27 came, but there were like 20 that came to the fair. And now it's going to be Eddie and Lawrence taking them around to the fair. And then something that I did, again, I made sure that everybody wasn't buying the same style. People never wanted to send their patterns because they're afraid that they're going to get knocked off. And I said, I'm here. I'll make sure that they're not knocked off. Because I found guys that were, I looked at production as X dollars per skin for the top Danish coat. So you give me the best running styles that you use, and we're going to have a slam dunk. So I literally crafted, different collections. And for the fair, I would put together a book, a customized book for every company attending because you can't be with 20 people at one time. So I would say, okay, if you're at Chung Kong Fur Factory, here's what you're going to look at. When I had the opportunity to go with them, which was either that day or, one of the following days that they're there, I showed them the collection that we made for them. But what I wanted them to do was to broaden their scope and just see, what's available there and then see where the value is. I told them, this is the value. This is what you want to be looking at. And I had all of those books made and I left with them. And Lawrence, I guess he realized then too that, wait a second, I don't know how to put that together. And that's what the customers, everybody who came always had that book.
Okay,
But
so let's now let's wrap that up, and then now let's wind us into what happened when he came back and how the whole Dicker and Dicker thing happened.
okay, so now I actually make the announcement, excuse me, at the Hong Kong Fur Fair, at the gala night, that I am leaving the business. I'm leaving the buying office and
And are
that
you
I
doing the Somper deal at this time, or you've decided against it already?
why I still didn't know about Samper. Again, that was all at that point. I could never make an agreement with him, and I wasn't wasting any more time with him. So
Okay.
I decided that if need be, it'll be Larry Becker's first, or it was I'm moving to California. That's where I wanted to live. I wanted my family to move to California. I always found a way in the 43 years that I was in the fur industry, 35 of them, well, 32 of them were spent in warm weather, California and Hong Kong, and California again. So I knew that that's what I wanted. And again, I come back. I never made a trip to Samper, exclusively to go deal with Samper. I went with my wife and my kids, and we went to look for a house. Um, I really even wasn't ready to look for a space or at that point I had already decided that my space would just be a warehouse because I wasn't going to have brick and mortar. I didn't think that there was an opportunity to finalize with Samper. And like I say, I had a plan and I was going to enforce it. So we go out to California, stayed at the beautiful W Hotel in Westwood. And we were living like kings. My kids would go down in the morning and get that $12 orange juice. I was going to kill
Oh yeah, and the pool
them.
there. Bobby used to love that pool.
So now I find a house. And well, while I was at the W Hotel, I get a call from Alan Seufer, and Seufer says, "I heard that you were having trouble with Felix Pressburger." He says, "Are you really interested in moving to California?" I said, "I'm in the process of buying a house now." He says, I said, "I'm in California now." He says, I want you to talk to Edwards Lowell. I
To
didn't even
who?
know who Edwards Lowell,
Why is the name that name familiar to me?
because they were furriers. I'm telling you, it wasn't familiar to me either. They were
No, the name's
furriers.
familiar to me from when I was in LA, right?
Yeah, they were furriers in Beverly Hills. Grace Lowell was, at the time, she was probably 84 years old. And her son, Paul, who's the nicest guy in the world, um, he was, I thought that he was running the business. Um, and Seufer says, maybe you should go into there. Maybe you should buy that place. Or actually, they didn't want to sell. He goes, maybe you could be partners with them, and you could operate your caravan business out of there and have the brick and mortar too, in a partnership. And I thought, all right, I'm here. Let's take a look. And as delightful as Grace was, and as nice as Paul was, it seemed that I knew I didn't want to be partners with an 84-year-old woman. I didn't see again. Okay, as Evans' showroom was antiquated, and then you had Somper's showroom was antiquated.
Right, 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 right.
Now we go into Edwards Lowell.
The
They
most
had a
antiquated
chandelier.
of all.
Oh God, they had a chandelier in the middle, and they had one of those round sofas around it. They would have meetings there, and some people were facing this way, some people were facing that. It was crazy. And I just decided, I had told Alan, I said, I could see doing something here. I really could. I said, but not with Grace. I would be partners with Paul. I could see that. And he said, well, let me, he was now my agent, because he was their agent. And
Right.
their business was falling as fast as anybody else. So, I mean, again, he was looking, if somebody was in there running the ship, then he could make money too. Again, that's the way an agent thinks. Just ask Sharon. Just
Uh,
look for more money.
uh,
Uh, anyway, I was not able to really make a deal with him yet, and I was considering it, and he was considering it, and I end up going back. I didn't buy a house here. I hadn't sold my house in Connecticut yet either, but I go back home to Connecticut. And again, at this point, there was no rush. I was doing it. I had Howard was paying me for to take over my end of the business. My plan was to move to California. So we go back home, and I needed a vacation after that. All right. So Sylvia, the kids, and I got on a plane and went to, I think it was Cancun. It was somewhere in Mexico. And it was the first day that the first morning that we were there. There's a note under my hotel room door that I have faxes. So I go downstairs. The first one I opened was that we had an offer on my house, and it was a full ask. And in those days, you didn't hear about full ask ever. Now homes go over the asking
oh, right,
price,
right, right.
but that was a full ask. And then I get an email, I mean, a fax from Paul saying that he spoke with his mom and he's going to make the deal. If I'm still interested in making the deal, and I was, because there was like no money involved. So it would have given me a base from which to work from. And he was not to be partners in the caravan business. We were only partners in the brick and mortar business. And like I say, well, God, we were celebrating that night. because everything just sort of stepped into place. We go home. I did, finalize the deal on the sale of the house. I am the most trusting person because I know I can be trusted. I never signed a contract. Never asked. Well, I never had the bones of a contract for what's his name, for Felix. But we had an agreement in theory, Paul Matsumoto and I never asked for a contract. And I proceeded to sell my house, bought a house, and because we did make another trip. We bought a house, and I came back and moved. I mean, we were moving to California. I'm gonna move my shit into Edwards Law. We actually moved there. I have $1 million worth of goods being uh, sent by ship so I could save money. And California, it was only like 12 days as opposed to like 20 to get to New York.
Right.
So it was a hell of a lot cheaper than air freight. And the stuff was on the water. I move in. Okay. It was the day that my furniture arrived. We were staying in a hotel until it did. The day my furniture arrives, I'm working like a dog, and unannounced, Paul comes to my house. And I'm like, oh, fuck, what's going on now? And he looked like somebody had just shot his dog. And he sits me down and he says, my mother doesn't want to do the deal. I said, what? He says, yeah, she doesn't want to retire. And I was like, I had been, maybe California wasn't the
Julius and Rose Meltzer went forward with the belief that their son's death was an accident, and this setback rocked the family during a time when brother A.L. and Herman's Evans Furs was skyrocketing to the top of the industry.
Those Meltzer kids obviously weren't taught how to cope or how to parent or relationship skills were really lacking, and that got passed down.
All I know is that he had a photographic memory, he was brilliant, and the family loved him.
Yeah, I think she loved the way I looked, so she was always like I was her little doll.
All of his grandchildren wrote reports on Nuremberg at some point in school. And someone would always have an assignment, interview some relative about something.
Nonchalantly would toss a question out, and the beads of sweat were pouring off as he's trying to answer Uncle Bernie's question.
A lot of people live in fear that, oh my God, is that going to happen to me?
In the end, a lot of people got hurt. A lot of customers got hurt. It was just a bad thing.
He's with this dinosaur, toy dinosaur on the table, and he says, what happened to these dinosaurs?
It was a very unique era.
Jeff and I got some calls, and people were just sobbing.
Well, they shut the doors on people. That was pretty high profile.
A fish has got to swim and an eagle's got to soar. That's their natural temperament and how they want to live and how they want to play. And when that's blocked, people are really unhappy.
Dicker and Dicker. So, why don't you start us there from where we left off? Of just again remind us, and just the very very short version at the very end because we went through it all already. At the end of Edwards Lowell, that didn't work out, and then what led you to finding the Dicker and Dicker people and going off on what we started talking about at the beginning, which is this storied TV brand that millions of people saw on TV, given away as prizes on the Price of Right on the Price is Right weekly for years and years and
They,
years.
we were the sole supplier of fur prizes for television in the 60s.
Wow.
Um, well, my blessing was this. I was moving to California. Simple as that. I had already, turned over my business. I was able to sell my business, or my portion of the business, to Howard Hinden at PBS and Associates, and I was moving to California. I really and truly needed to get back to the warm weather, find an existence in fur business in a warm weather climate, and I loved California. So I was forging forward, and I would have just built a brand on my own to do my business, which was at the point caravans. I just wanted to do caravans across the country. And I got a call from, everybody was saying, you're not destined for California because you keep running into these obstacles. And I always believed if it didn't kill you, it made you stronger. So I just kept going forward. And I got a call from a very dear gentleman, Nat Berkowitz, the chinchilla guy. He was the premier chinchilla maker in New York. And he
What
happened to
what
be
what what was the name of their firm again?
Miller and Berkowitz. Miller and Berkowitz. And, again, when I was in New York, I became friendly with whoever was there selling their wares. So, like I say, it was like people rooted for me. And especially when I was down. So he called me and he said, "Do you know this gentleman named Alan Shea?" And I says, "I do not." And he told me the story. And again, it was like everything in California was underground shit. He
And it
tells
had
me
a
the
story
story.
behind it.
Yeah, he tells me a story about how, so he's the owner of Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills. And I said, "Well, what happened to the brothers?" And he said, "Well, the brothers sold the business to this guy Schwartz in Texas. And then Schwartz left the night of the Northridge earthquake. He and
Uh,
his wife were he and his wife were going through a bitter divorce, and business was not good. The anti-fur movement was pretty strong. That was what, 92.
yep.
It was pretty strong in California. And I remember the mayor's wife was big in Beverly Hills. She was big on anti-fur. And okay, so Nat Berkowitz is telling me, he's a very nice guy. He took over the business, and when the Schwartzes left, he somehow got the business by default, and he operates. I said, "Where's the store?" And
Well,
he
it's got
says,
a
"Well, yeah."
brand name, like I said at the top there, that it had maybe the most recognizable name in the fur industry because of this TV show.
I absolutely believed and believed that that was the case, um, because that was my excitement. Was that this is like a real blessing because nobody knew Sampa furs, nobody knew Edwards and Lowell furs. Now all of a sudden, I was gonna tag them with Sampa furs of Beverly Hills or Edwards Lowell of Beverly Hills when I'm going into Dubuque, Iowa, and Des Moines to go sell furs. Anyway, I said, "Where's his store? I'd like to meet him." And he said, "Well, his store is in his house." And I went, "Okay, okay." And I was open to anything at that point, and wanted to hear what the next guy was trying to screw me with in California. And I go to his house and I met him and his wife, and they were just delightful people. Here was a man in his probably at that point in 2000 or 1999, he was probably in his mid to late 70s. And yes, he did. He converted his garage into a little showroom where he must have had 30 furs and a nice couch, a beautiful desk. And he would go to work. I mean, go to work. He would go from his bedroom to the garage in a suit. And
Wow.
I sat there for a few days thinking, what is this man doing? Nobody ever came to his house to do anything. The furs that he had, there were more moths than furs.
Well, he's got it
in
in a garage in California.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I asked him, I says, I saw value certainly in the name, in the brand name, especially for what I was doing. So I asked him, I said, Alan, are you interested? I said, Nat, told me.
Interested in moving it out of the garage.
No, I asked him, I
I mean,
said, what do
it
you
sounds
want?
like Microsoft again at this point.
I said to him, I says, how much do you want for the business? I said, add the house.
Does the garage come with it?
Right? Add the house and the 31st. Well, it was better than that because I think it was a 4-bedroom house. And they were, their kids were already, they were empty nesters. Each one of those rooms had the customer's furs. They had the customer's furs in there for storage. And I'm going to tell you something. These were old people. They kept their house warm. It wasn't really good. It wasn't beneficial for those customers.
Well, they called it storage, not cold storage, so they were okay.
Right, exactly. California's warm. You want to put your stuff into storage at Alan's house. And I mean, basically, I said to him, I said,
What a story.
are you interested in selling the business? Nat Berkowitz said you were ready to call it quits. And he looked at me like I had two heads. He goes, no, I love my business. And,
look around. Why would I sell this? I'm sorry. Usually it's you doing this to me, but I can't help it this time.
I said to him, I said, first of all, explain. He goes, no, I'm not interested in selling the business. He says, maybe partnering. And I said, I don't think I could fit in your garage here because I had a big desk, and I had other aspirations besides just the caravan business.
This garage ain't big enough for the both of us.
I mean, there was no place to park anymore.
Right.
So all I can tell you is, like I say, he was probably one of the nicest people I had, certainly the nicest person I had come across in California at that point. And I sat down with him and I just basically, I said, I just want to think of something that I could do. And literally on my way home, my drive was 30 minutes, 40 minutes. On my way home, I figured, I was always, my career, I felt the height of my career was being an agent. So I put myself as the middleman here. And I said to Alan, I'm thinking, all right, what could I do for Alan? I don't want to buy his house. I don't want to bring customers to his garage. I want to use that name everywhere but Southern California. You want to operate from your house, that's fine. Just don't tell anybody because I'm going to be advertising everywhere.
Right.
And I came up with the idea, I'll license the name from him. He told me he did like $40,000 worth of business in a year, which included his storage. So, and he was getting good money. The cleaning, I don't know. He had this yardstick that he would just bang the stuff and then charge people like $55.
And let's back up for a second, if we may. So I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember if they were still operating as a store when you and I were in California in the early '80s or not.
They did. They
But it's a
operated till
story.
night.
It's a storied brand, right? I mean, they had a store. They had store. They were the presence when, along with Somper, but nobody knew Somper like this. I mean, they were the ones that got picketed with the protests and blah 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 blah. I mean,
Right, because we
they were
were
the
the
most
brand,
notable. Right, right.
we were the recognized brand, which was, I do believe that even today, when you think of the fur industry, is there a name that is more recognized than Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills? And I don't think there is, because of the national recognition that not Bob Barker.
Yeah, Bob Barker. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, Bob Barker was not. He was
Who was
not
the
a
host? Who
supporter.
was the host then?
Monty Hall
Oh
was
God, that's
let's
going
make a
way
deal.
back.
And Mac
Oh, let's. Oh, I thought it was The
Mac
Price is Right. It was on
no, it was I think The Price is Right was the only show it wasn't on. It was like
Okay,
Hollywood
okay.
Squares, Gambit, Queen for a Day. Uh,
Everywhere.
yeah,
No,
everywhere.
that's why if you went around, not only was it the most recognizable name, but if you said to people at the, what does the name Dicker and Dicker Beverly Hills, that people would automatically, oh, game show, they know. I mean, it was just one of the most brilliant marketing things for a small business. Because remember, he's alongside on all these TV shows, alongside Amana and Whirlpool and Ford and all these
Oh no,
companies much bigger
exactly.
than little Dicker and Dicker of Beverly
And
Hills.
it was the most desired prize. It was one of the most expensive prizes that were, awarded. I actually did a live Let's Make a Deal show with Monty Hall when I probably owned the business for a year. And they had opened up Chumash Casino in Ventura County.
Uh-huh.
And Mac Dicker was still friendly with Monty Hall, still playing golf with him. And he got me involved to be one of the sponsors of the show. And it was hysterical because there was a woman that they brought back, to be interviewed to play again on the show, on this live show, who had won a Dicker and Dicker fur like 40 years prior. And that night she won the fur that we supplied,
Wow, that's funny.
for the event. But so here I am on my drive home, and I'm thinking, what could I do to entice
But
Alan?
let me ask you a question before you get to enticing Alan. So does anything go through your mind though that with when you're looking at the garage, questioning whether the brand still has the oomph and the panache that of what we're talking about here, or did you know that?
Well, in Los Angeles, they had been closed. Basically, they did not have a retail brick and mortar presence since 1992.
Okay.
So this was now 1999. For 7 years, he's been operating a very unsuccessful business from his garage. So to me, it didn't matter. Again, something that I have to sort of pre qualify. The people who knew this brand name, they had to be, by 1999, they had to be about 45 plus years old.
Right.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have seen it on TV. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that was the only challenge, but I still felt that, hell, if I could make a deal with this guy, it would be much better than me investing my money in stores and brick and mortar just to
Well,
be
and
able.
starting from scratch, right? So okay, so go back to it's easier than starting from scratch something existing. So go back to okay, so you're on the
Okay, so
way
now
home thinking about what you can offer Alan Shea to get this deal done for as little as possible without the garage thrown in.
Yes, and I'm thinking, what would give me a good way to kickstart my idea of this business? And I'm thinking, I said, okay, here's the brainstorm. The guy had 30 pieces that were as old. They spent more time in the fur industry than I
Uh,
had it.
yeah, right, right.
So I thought to myself, I've got a warehouse that's going to be filled with furs, just filled with furs. Alan, I could give an entire brand new inventory for him to invite his customers in. You know what I mean? Mostly it was his cleaning lady that got to see the collection because she was in the house. But I said, okay, that's something good. And then I could give him, I want to license the name for everywhere outside of Southern California. So I'm not stepping on his toes.
Right.
Nobody was. Nobody was. And now I've got the name that I could take on the road, and I'm going to pay him a license fee, which, if he accepts, I think that this could be pretty good for him. And I basically turned around the next day and went back, and I sat down with him, and he was so indecisive. He was so nervous. He said, I wanna ask Mac Dicker. Mac Dicker is the one that showed him how he can grab the name without paying for it, which he
And
did.
move it into the garage.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess if he had brick and mortar, people would have known.
I mean, no,
Anyway,
just the fact that you would even question, you've got somebody here with deep industry experience that could, make you some money without getting in the way of what you're doing at the moment, playing your little stupid game. Why wouldn't you just grab that?
okay, all I can tell you is this. I did my due diligence because, again, this was black market business. And I did my due diligence to make sure that this guy Schwartz did not own the business anymore. It was a
Right.
registered trademark. And it didn't show that Alan Shea owned it. It showed that nobody owned it. So I basically got it registered for Alan Shea. That he now became the owner of the trademark so that I could license it. He agreed with the, I'll say, guidance or push of Mac Dicker that this is a great thing. And in the first year, shooting from the hip, we left like November 15th on Caravan, came back like February 20th, and we did $1 million worth of business.
Wow.
And I paid him almost as much as he did in his
Out of the
quest
garage.
to be. Yeah, so now his wife is all excited because now, even though I gave him a brand new inventory, nobody was coming to the house. I mean, and the people were so old that he had the storage with, they weren't coming to the house either. They were just they were sent, they were
It
sending
never
him
came out of
checks.
storage. It's part of his
No,
collection now.
exactly. So now the moths are all over the house. And Alan's wife is like, she befriended me and she says, I really appreciate what you're doing for Alan. And now I start thinking a little bit down the road. It was the second year that, that I'm doing this business with him. I had a warehouse where I stored the furs when they weren't on, when we weren't on the road. I had, I don't know, 75 pieces at his house. And then, in an effort to make his wife a part of the victory here, I said, Alan, why don't I take your furs? I have a cold storage warehouse. I'll take your furs and I will service your customers for you. I mean, he was an old man. And the service was that I hung them away. And then, at the end of the year,
Right.
he would bill them. And so I did that, and his wife was just enamored
Yeah,
because
and to get the shit out of the house.
she's getting her house back piece by piece,
Right.
right? So now,
Oh,
I mean, the story actually takes an ugly twist because he wasn't a very healthy man, and he took sick, and he was in the hospital for, I don't know, probably 2 weeks. And during that time, I started thinking, oh, fuck, what happens if he's not in the business anymore? Maybe it's time that I open up a brick and mortar presence in Beverly Hills. The business was really good for me, and that presence in Beverly Hills made sense. And as luck would have it, I think the second day that I went out looking, I didn't even find it. My furrier found it.
Well,
She was having coffee with somebody, with a friend of hers, and calls me and says, I think I just found our new Beverly Hills store. And I went down there. I said, this is perfect. Now I go to Alan's wife and I said, when he comes out of the hospital, I'm going to take everything. And now I'm opening up a store in Beverly Hills. My warehouse, which I invited him to come work out of, yeah, he had 1,000 coats to work from. No customers, but 1,000 coats. It was too far for him to drive. You know, it was like a 30, 40-minute drive from Beverly Hills. He wasn't going to do that. But now he's got his customers. I'm going to build a beautiful store. And I made business cards for him and everything. You know, it was like, this is going to be perfect. And his
okay,
wife
so he
was,
came, so he came, so he recovered then.
he didn't.
He
Here's the
didn't.
problem.
Okay. So you wait,
No.
okay, wait. So you're doing all you're making cards for him and doing all this stuff and whatnot while he's
Well,
ill and
honestly,
assuming that this is the deal I'm gonna bring him in on.
well, I mean, I was inviting him to come to the store to serve his customers, as opposed to, I was trying to appease his wife and get the shit out of there.
Yeah, of
You know what I
course.
mean? Because I
She loved
knew
it.
that I also knew that I needed her on my side at
Yep.
one point or another. And sadly, he never came out of the hospital. He was in the
Okay.
hospital for about 2 months and passed away in the hospital. Now I have a license agreement. I have all of the stuff in my
Okay, so you
place.
have a signed agreement with him, so you're not shit out of luck here or anything.
Oh no, no, no.
Okay, okay, okay. I just want to make sure.
And, and then I was able to, through his wife and his son, I was able to make a deal to now buy the trademark Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills.
Okay.
So now his widow is getting $100,000. I own the name. I could do whatever I want with it, wherever I want. Everybody was happy, right?
Let me ask you a stupid question. I'm sure you don't have the answer for this. There's,
If it's
I mean,
stupid, I may.
there's no trace of the value of this business as it changed hands these 4 or 5 times. In other words, the 100,000 was down from what at its peak? Millions. This business must have been worth in value.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, like I say, the most valuable thing that he had in that business in 1999 was the garage door opener and the key to his car, because he would do pickups and deliveries. You know what I mean? The business was worth zero
Zero
at
by
that,
then. Okay, okay,
and
okay.
and especially in Los Angeles, because they closed in the middle of the night in 1992 or 93. So they didn't have the best reputation.
So then, why did you assess that the name and the brand and everything was worth even the 100 grand still at this point?
Well, because I was proving that I was doing $1 million worth of business,
Okay.
or you know what I mean, a million
Yeah,
two,
no, it
and
makes sense numerically. Yep.
yeah, excuse me, I absolutely realized the value of the name, and then felt that with my presence of inventory and a fresh eye, and I'm telling you, I started in a store that was 1,200 square feet. I had my warehouse, so I didn't need the storage on site in Beverly Hills. I did it. I did it smart because number one, I lived in the valley, right down the street from where the warehouse was. So my day would start in Beverly Hills, end in the valley. You know, I, it,
Did you have any concern about like the old thing that we had in Evans about, you've now got this physical location for a 4 month a year business?
well, that became. We ended up doing like 2,700 coats in storage
Well,
from
okay, so that
from
that kept your summers busy.
Well, yeah, again, what I did was I built a staff that had a following. So it was almost like this guy, Doug Fine, who I met him at Samper First. When I was looking at Samper First to buy, I met him. And I sort of figured he was like the Pied Piper because everybody wanted to deal with Doug. They had like three salespeople there, but it was only Doug that they wanted to deal with.
Right,
And he
right,
was
right.
and he was the Pied Piper. When I got screwed from Samper Furs, and I'll finish the story because Dicker and Dicker didn't end that sweet either. Um, I took him from Samper Furs. I offered him a job. And like I say, he came with that flute, and so did all of his customers. So now
I
Alan
mean, that's
passes.
real. That's real, like old school, the end of an era, type of sales and customer loyalty, where the customer was the salespersons, not the businesses.
Well, he ended up working under when Felix Pressburger sold. He didn't sell to me. He sold to Lenny Tax and Michael Pappas, the Lynx guy, who at one point was my friend, but that didn't last too long. Um, he was firing Doug anyway. Doug
Okay.
was going to lose his job. In fact, I think he may have lost his job, and I got him connected at first. I did. I got him connected at first with Edwards Lowell because, again, I was always an agent. I'm always putting people together, right?
Right.
So now Alan passes. His wife is the benefactor of the money. We made a deal. And now I start building the store. I had to construct it. It literally was four walls when I rented it. So it took me about 2 months. I built out
Whereabouts were you on Robertson?
on Robertson, just off of Wilshire.
Okay.
And I mean, I built a beautiful store. And I
And
think
what a
we were
great location too, right in like on Robertson where it's new and chic, but right near Wilshire in the old where it's the old corridor of old luxury and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it was the location was
Yep.
ideal, and when I first rented it, it was 2001, I think. It was either late 2000 or 2001. Um, I was paying, oh God, it was cheap. It was like $3,500 rent. At the end, it was like $13,000 rent. But anyway, make a long story short, 2 days into the store, when we opened, and I'm doing a grand opening thing, and it's hustle and bustle in the store. Everything was great. We're drinking champagne. My fax machine goes off, and I start looking at it as it's coming through from a lawyer, and it was to Alan Shea,
Uh-oh.
addressed to Alan Shea. Now I'm like, what the? I don't get this. What is this? Now the phone rings, and they ask for Alan Shea. And I said, I hate to be the bearer of bad news.
He's gone, yep.
Alan Shea is dead. And they just hung up. And now I'm reading this thing. They claim it was from Lenny Tax and Michael Pappas's attorneys,
Wow.
claiming that they owned the trademark Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills. And I'm like, are you kidding me again? It's like every time I turned around. Now I knew I spent the money, I had the right lawyer, I did my due diligence. Nobody owned that name.
Right. He checked
Alan,
it. He did the tracing of it and everything, the attorney,
yes,
right? Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And Alan Shea became the registered owner of that name on my dime. I knew it all. I contact my lawyer. I said, could you believe this shit? And he goes, yeah, these people are, they're just out. They're not going to win. Well, $220,000 later. 220,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
$1,000 later, I get this thing from the Patent and Trademark Council that says, "Congratulations, you have been found to be the owner of Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills." Because right away, right when Alan died, it was a couple of months, when he had died, I my lawyer transferred the ownership based on the contract, the agreement that I signed with his wife. I was now Larry Becker, or Larry BLLC, was the owner of Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills. All right, all clean and dry, everything good. So I call my lawyer. I got this thing now. I said, I'm the winner. Where's the money? And he says, "Oh, the Patent and Trademark Council, they won't issue any kind of reward. They just make a judgment on who is the owner. That you have to
Uh,
do in a civil court." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "So what do we have to do?" He says, "Well, you'll need to raise about $100,000 in a war
oh
chest
no.
to fight this
Uh,
guy." And I says, "You know what? I'm going to change the first two letters of the first two name, of the name, to Becker and Becker, and fuck this all. I'm finished with anybody in California." And my lawyer says to me, "Calm down, calm down. You paid a lot for it, and you own it." He says, "I'll help you." He was my friend also. He goes, "I will help you to fight this if you want to." He says, "I'm going to say one thing, though. It's going to take 10 years." And he says to me,
oh my God.
"Do you think," and he goes, "We're going to win." He goes, "Do you think this guy is going to live 10 years?" Now, do you remember Michael Pappas?
No, I don't. I
Oh,
don't
I,
remember.
kn- I knew him quite intimately at that point, and he had plenty of money. So he didn't mind throwing it he wanted to put me out of business. I mean, that was his goal. So I figured, the only thing that I could do to hurt this guy is work harder to make Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills the fur business in Beverly Hills. And he ended up leaving like maybe 4 years after that and going to an area in Los Angeles. He did not have a Beverly Hills presence anymore.
So
Not that I
he
took.
gave up the fight. He just gave up the fight eventually.
Um, no, I mean he was a manufacturer too. I mean,
Okay.
and he had a business. Not that he grew. I grew the business, the Dicker and Dicker business, or I cloned it. Let's say it was out there. I had to rebuild it. He had taken over a business from Eddie Jacobs and then Felix Pressburger.
I
It was
remember Eddie
just
Jacobs.
Eddie Jacobs was a
I remember
character.
him. Yeah, yeah,
He
I
was
remember
he
him.
was a true character.
Larry and I
But
had dinner with him a couple of times, I recall.
but all I can tell you is, so that was the last time a furrier gave me a tough time in California.
Okay, what about now? Tell me about the resistance you're seeing. What year are we in now? About 2000 and what?
Um, After
2001, 2002? Yeah,
when
when
I
you
had
just
just
take.
taken over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was 2001 was the
Okay,
first year that we
so
opened.
now as you as you open this store in Beverly Hills, and as you start to take the shit on the road, doing trunk shows throughout the season, are you starting to see any resistance and to any anti-fur stuff? Give me a little bit about that.
In 91 in Beverly Hills, Fur Free Friday was non-existent. I think it started, having they had impact. I mean, they would have their parade, their picketing, but they never got enough of a group that made impact. So they would start like at Neiman's on Wilshire Boulevard,
Right, right, right.
and they would end there because there just wasn't enough, activity for them. I
Marty
think it
said
was,
kind of the same thing about Texas, that they'd start at Neiman's at North Park and they would peter out by the time it got to Coslow's.
yeah, 2015, different story. Because they would gather a group of 400 or 500 people, and they would start at Neiman's. They'd go to Saks Fifth Avenue, and then they would park themselves all day in front of Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills.
Because you've got the name. That was the whole point of getting the name. Now you got the name,
And
and that's what
again,
comes with it as well.
I've always been a big believer of publicity is publicity, and we would make it onto the news because they were picketing in front of us. And it was hysterical because I would have customers that would drop off their 15, 16-year-old daughter in the front of the store so that she could hold the sign and picket. And then the mother would come around the back into the parking lot and come into the store and look for
what a
furs.
life.
It was a little weird. But again, I mean, it was.
I want to talk about that end a little bit because I think this is as fascinating as the pulling the thing out of the garage. So, okay, so you've been there a dozen or 15 years now, and tell me about the gathering of the steam in California towards the ban law and your involvement in trying to not have that happen. And the like I said, that it gained steam and start a snowball towards you and the other people in the industry there. And give us a little timeline of how that happened and what the reactions of all you furriers were at the time, and when it got to the point where you saw that there was nothing you were going to be able to do about it.
It was never a big issue. I mean, the only time you ever heard any anti-fur campaigning was on Fur Free Friday. That was it. It wasn't a big issue. And frankly speaking, when when the council members that spearheaded this movement from LA, when they got it started, everybody laughed at them. I was cracking up, thinking, "You think that you're going to be able to stop the fur industry in California?" I says, you got Hollywood, you got Beverly Hills, you've got, well, we don't have it anymore, Malibu and Pacific Palisades, the wealthiest spots.
Okay, but let me ask you a stupid question. You lived through and saw some of it after you'd left Evans also, but that's one of the three pillars along with the Meltzer family strife and the changing of culture and society and whatnot, and people not dressing up anymore. But the third pillar of the three-legged stool that brought down Evans was the anti-fur movement. So you really didn't think that this could gain steam or happen, or that it was a joke after what you'd gone through and seen with Evans?
So you know what the difference was in California? Furs were not utilitarian like they were in New York or Chicago. And again, it wasn't a commercial business in California. You remember Robinson's was not a commercial business. When Robinson's went out and May Company came in, it became shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? There was no fur business because that wasn't the customer that was.
No, and they did a great job of merchandising to the store. Like that Beverly Hills store rivaled any of the stores on Rodeo Drive for fancy shit. But then by the time you got to Torrance, it was a different story.
Exactly. I mean, that's what we were key at. I mean, Evans were masters at merchandising their stores. That's what kept us alive as long as we were. I mean, again, at the end, it was because we always bought right, and at the end, we weren't able to buy right.
So let me sidetrack you. So everybody you're talking to in the LA and California market, nobody gives any teeth to this thing at the beginning.
Oh, nobody did. And
okay, when did that change?
Okay, so it was, I believe it was August 19th.
Or let me back you. Let me back you up before the answer. So at first it's talk, right? So it's just talk amongst the council. Then at a certain point it becomes a bill or whatever they call it in LA that's presented, and then it becomes something to actually debate and discuss.
It was never debated. It was just approved.
Okay.
I mean, really and truly.
No
So I
public
would,
hearings or anything?
yeah, there were, but no, it wasn't public. It wasn't public.
Oh, because
This
normally
was
they open that up for public comment and shit, and that's still a foregone
when
conclusion
it
that's
was
going to
voted
happen. But at least you bitch and scream a little bit.
when it was voted upon. Yes, it was open. In fact, the Furriers, California Furriers, had representation there, and PETA had representation. We had like 30 people. They had 3,000 people. Maybe not 3,000, but and the whatchamacallit, inside the auditorium, they let those people just walk in and make a presence. There was no way that the fur industry was going to win that battle that day. Simple as that. And like I say, it just sort of came out of the blue that it was announced. And literally weeks later, there's a vote in Sacramento.
Okay,
And
wait, hold on, slow down. I want to slow you down a little bit because this shit's fascinating to me. So, okay, so the LA Council passes something saying, correct? Am I correct? Saying that they're going to ban fur?
well, they wanted to ban fur. It was the
So it's
government. They had
it's a proclamation at this point. In other words, they
Mhm.
passed a proclamation. Okay, so
Yeah.
now it goes to Sacramento for Newsom and the state Senate and House to debate this thing. So now, are any of you start again? When's the aha moment that you all start to go, this might fucking happen? What do we do? And even though it's too
Well,
late at
okay,
that point.
so let's say 2 weeks before the vote, you started seeing things on TV. It started becoming a little bit more public. And they were like, asking the journalists were out on the street, asking people what they thought. And everybody said, hey, if you want to wear fur, wear fur. I wouldn't ban the sale of fur. There's no reason to ban the sale of fur. They called the LA Times contacted me. They contacted, I think, like 3 other furriers in Los Angeles and asked our opinion on whether or not we thought that they were going to pass this ban. And I was the only one. And what would we do if if the ban was passed? And I was the only one that said, I cannot imagine how they're going to pass this ban. I said, it's the second oldest industry in existence. Nobody is saying that, you have to wear a fur coat. And nobody is recognizing the fact that, like, for example, my business, 75 years old. We've been paying taxes. We've been bringing revenue to the state. We've been supplying jobs. Why?
Okay, but this
What
this
bet?
is again where the excuse me, hold on one second. This is again where the that Evans comment slash argument comes up of you're saying the exact same thing that we said 15 years earlier, which was it's the same thing. We're the second oldest industry. If we wait these people out, so again, and if you rewind it a little bit, like we talked about earlier, by the time we got around to taxing the auctions to give money to FICA, it was too late at that point. So this sounds like you're trucking down that same path all over again.
Well, and it was. I mean, again, you say David was like instrumental in that 1% for the auctions, to collect that money at the auctions, because otherwise you'll never collect it. And I mean, the Furriers was stupid because we didn't support it. It was like,
Okay,
oh,
but
business is
are we being stupid again now? Okay, so the LA Times is saying, "What do you think? Do you think this will pass?" You said you
and,
don't think, but others that they're talking to are saying yes, that this
okay.
might
So my
pass.
my
Yes.
answer was no. I do not believe it's going to pass. So they said, well, what are you going to do if it does? I said, I'm going to close my doors. And the other people were saying, if it passes, they didn't even take the tact of it not passing. It was like, if it passes, we'll just sell on the gray market, or in the underground.
Is there any
And
chitter chatter amongst all of you? Like, do you have any people that you're in contact with in the California market, or any association or trade thing? And are people starting to yickety yakety back and forth, and oh no, what do we do? Or it's
At
just
that time, at
this
that
is this
time,
foregone conclusion and it's too late, or what?
well, again, it was like I don't think that any of the furriers, and yes, I mean we did have, discussions, amongst each other, ourselves, but nobody expected it to really happen. Like I say, the population, the people that were interviewed, nobody had a negative thing to say. Yes, end the fur business. It was like I really couldn't believe that there would be any benefit for Californians. So why would our governor pass this? And like I say, the approach of the other furriers were, well, if they do, I'll just do this, that, and the
Right.
other.
Well, it's a
And
natural, as you're looking back on it now, to me, it's a natural extension of, okay, well, what we did in the 80s and 90s was created this, this shitstorm that put a lot of these furriers out of business. So to me, this is just a natural extension now of let's go from that to let's put the industry out of business rather than going after individual businesses. So
well,
again, to me, some of this is, and again, you tell me if I'm wrong or you disagree or whatnot, but to me, some of this is in retrospect that you guys should have seen this coming again because it happened. This was history repeating itself within your same lifetime in this industry.
you know what the biggest, I'd say, dilemma at the time was? It wasn't the anti-fur movement in general. It was business in general. Business was horrible for like 3 years leading up to 2019. But
Yep.
but again, you see the way I look at it, and I've always been, you know me for a long time. I've always been a half full kind of guy.
Right, right,
The
right.
glass is half full. So I actually, the second that it was reported that Newsom passed AB 41 and the sale of new furs will become illegal in the state of California. I think they gave us 2 years or 3 years in order to sell our wares.
Oh, I didn't
And
know it was that long. Okay.
yeah, I think it was 2 years. Actually, I don't even remember. But my mind was made up the second that he announced it that I'm going out of business because I don't want to sit there like a schmuck and then fight with other people. And like I say, have to qualify this. Business sucked to begin with.
Right, right, right,
So
right.
so I wasn't going to sit around and pussyfoot around. I wanted to go out of business immediately, and I started my campaign. I started the advertising, concept that day. And again, it was August 19th. On October 1st, my mailer hit, my 4,500 customers and explaining that we were going out of business. And what I did though is I called the journalist from the LA Times that reported on, the Furrier's, answers as to whether or not they thought that it's going to pass and what we would do. And I called her. Her name was Sonia Sharp. And I called her and I said, Sonia, I says, I introduced myself and I said, so the governor passed AB 41. I says, I think I have a great follow-up story for you. And she goes, what's that? And I said, well, Dicker and Dicker of Beverly Hills, a Beverly Hills furrier, has been in business for 75 years, and we are going to close our doors immediately because of this. And I said, isn't that a great story? And she goes,
She didn't give a shit at that point.
oh no. She
Oh,
goes,
she did. Okay.
she goes, you know what? Let me check with my editor. I'll get back to you in a couple of days.
Okay.
I hang up the phone. I swear it wasn't 10 minutes. She says to me, I spoke to the editor. He would love to do. By the time the story broke, it was already, I want to say, middle of January or the end of February, where that's when the story actually broke. It was the front
Of what year?
of 2020.
Okay.
Very important. Very important.
Okay.
So now I started the sale from October to November.
So now you're bumping into COVID too.
Well, that's what I'm sort of getting at.
Okay. Okay.
What happened was when that not ad, it was literally the whole front section of the LA Times that day, where it was the front page and the back page of the front section with pictures and the whole background story. If I tell you that my phone was ringing off the hook from every concierge at every hotel in Los Angeles. I have a customer here that wants this, this, and this. Do you have this? And just sending people in. Then it was like the next day, they started bringing a camera crew in, and they have a cable show. What was it, on Spectrum News? It was like an Eye on LA thing. And they interviewed me and the customers in the store. It was amazing, Scott. Between it was really 3.5 months of me doing a going out of business sale. I did 3 years worth of business. And my lease, and that was one of the things that factored into my decision not to, forge forward in the business. My lease, I was on the last leg of a 10 or 15-year lease, and my landlord was a real asshole. And I was the only one that had staying power. There were 4 stores in the building. Everybody else had, every year there was somebody new, and they were paying 3 times the amount I was paying. So I knew that was going to be a problem. And I just identified, in fact, at the end, I was supposed to turn my keys in the end of February. And because of what they ran on TV, I asked him to give me another couple of weeks. And I mean, I was there for 20 years.
Right.
I asked him, give me another couple of weeks. And that son of a bitch charged me for it.
Of
But I
course.
did it. I did it. And I turned in my keys. I can't remember the actual date. I think it's March 8th in my head. Maybe it was the 12th. I turned in my keys to him. I left the store. I sold literally down to the piece because I had so much support from vendors in New York and my friends in California that at the end I needed consignment merchandise because I was selling off all my shit. And and then I had somebody, one of the New York guys, he bought whatever I had left over of my own goods. We made a deal and he bought that. So I was able to go like this and basically go home. I was out of business. I turned in my keys, and then a week later, you couldn't work anywhere, only essential workers. I would have been out of business. I wouldn't have been able to afford, especially if I signed a new lease. And then
you would have been screwed.
Screwed. Absolutely screwed. So again, there's the glass half full. Exactly.
So anyways, okay, well, thank you so much. That was great. This was a great little odyssey in the first part of our series on life after Evans and what people did. And I wanted to do Larry first because his is extremely intricate and has longevity too after he left Evans. So great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us and being with us to share all this with us.
Thank you for allowing me this. I feel like I should be laying on a couch telling you this.
I will send you the bill in the mail. But until that time, when we do this again, he is Larry Becker, one of the producers of the film. I am Scott Hunter. This is the podcast in support of Skin on Skin, the rise and fall of the world's largest furrier part 2. And we will definitely do this again. So everybody have a great day. We'll see you soon.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast in support of the film Skin on Skin, the rise and fall of the world's largest furrier, Part 2.
I get the brilliant idea to ask the security guard to show us where John Lennon was shot.
And when they say Reggie Theus is on his way down to the first line, and I was like, oh my God, I ain't gonna be able to do this.
Mr. Brenner, I gotta tell you, you are just favorite comedian in the world.
Sylvester Stallone discovered Mr. T at some kind of event.
I said, oh, Mr. T, could you order it? He goes, can't you see I'm busy?
She's just made this sale to Mr. T. They sold him these 2 ginormous mink coats.
And he said, who is that white boy you got with me? That ain't no white boy. I said, that is Scott Hunter.
Line for Ron Isley of the Isley Brothers.
On the next episode of the Companion Podcast, in support of the film Skin on Skin, The Rise and Fall of the World's Largest Furrier, Part 2.